And I am recording. Hello everybody. Um, we are going to keep reading Kyoshi's. We last left off where Heiran felt very dishonorable, so she cut off all of her hair. And now they're sorry, I was just looking at a notification. And now they're trying. They went to an island, of a Fire Nation island, to meet this fire sage that can hopefully, help Kyoshi get into contact with her, with her, with her past lives. So that's happening. Heiran also is there too. They're trying to also lure Yoon over there so they can capture him or whatever. And Heiran says she's willing to risk her life to help them get Yoon. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah, and even when they're the political climate everywhere, but especially in this town island that they're at, is pretty like torn between the Sawan and the other guys. Sorry. Okay, let me get this over here. Let me get that over here. There we go. Yeah, I'm gonna put on the... put the charger on my laptop now. Sorry for all the loud noises I'm making. I try not to, but alas, it happens. And I think I might be able to finish this book this week. Or, if not this week, most definitely next Monday. Which I am so hyped about. And, for those of you wondering what the next book I'm going to be reading, as a tribute to the series, the Netflix series ending, I am going to be reading the original 13 Reasons Why book, and that can be triggering for a lot of people. So, big heads up, but that is what I'm going to be reading next. After that, I don't know what I'm going to be reading. Maybe the Narnia books? That's been on my mind, so maybe that's a good contender. And then there's also some other books that I've read in the past that I would like to read again for nostalgia. But yeah, just a heads up. Okay. So yeah, Kyoshi is noticing that there's a lot of intense feelings with the Sauron and the other guys. Okay. And the Carousel. That's the other one. Okay. So the next chapter is called Spiritual Exercises. Okay. Spiritual exercises. It doesn't surprise me they were related, Nyahifa said when Kyoshi told him about the active battery she'd stopped. Enemies are enemies, but no one can shame you like your own family. She and Rengi had immediately hauled the offenders to the town jail, but the local judge's indifferent response to the crime and his strong family resemblance to the uncle of the victim meant it was unlikely they'd be locked up for longer than overnight. She would have to remember the troublemakers' faces if she saw them around town in the morning. Kyoshi followed Nyahifa on a narrow path that crept up the rim of the caldera. It was just the two of them. Her entire party had shown up to his tent at the appointed time. He'd taken one look at the motley group before declaring that spiritual breakthroughs were not a group activity. He would need the Avatar alone. Climbing up here had been sweaty work in the humidity of the island. Climbing up here had been sweaty work for the humidity of the island. It was easy to talk now, exposed to cooling breezes that ran across the edges of the cliff heights. It's not a good sign, though, Nyahifa said. Fights don't usually break out until later in the festival. Once the alcohol starts flowing, I'm sure... let me say it again. Fights don't usually break out until later in the festival. Once the alcohol starts flowing, I'm sure you have plenty of drunken aggression in the Earth Kingdom. But here, where you've got to avenge every stupid slight upon your name, he grimaced. I tell you, I don't love that part about my country. Kyoshi knew the feeling. The Earth Kingdom's hidebound corrupt habits had caused her no end of grief. At least there won't be any Agni Kais, Nyahifa said. It's a spiritual offense to burn another person during a holiday. That's neat. They walked further until they came to a bluff that overlooked a growing plain, a flattened, gentle slope that bore the markings of plow and hoe. Most of the ground had been upturned and emptied. There's not enough light to see it clearly now, but over there are the Millennium. But over there are the Millennium fields, Nyahifa said, pointing to a still green patch on the opposite side of the village. They're an extremely sensitive crop, so they stay in the ground until the very end of the festival. I'd be surprised if they even survived that long, though. The town is withering, Avatar. The tourist money, it helps, but it's not enough. Do you think the rumors are true? Could the spirits be angry at Lord Zoryu for some reason? Man guesses. Spirits act, Nyahifa said, trotting out an old trotting out an old expression. You could try asking them yourself once you figure out how. He pointed to a stump on another nearby clearing. That's where we tie up your flying bison, if you had one. Kyoshi frowned. I do have a bison, or at least access to one. What? Nyahitha's shout echoed in the evening air. Why didn't you say so? We've been hiking for an hour. We could have flown here in minutes. You didn't tell me where we were going. I thought the walking was part of the spiritual exercise. The two of them held back from swearing at each other. Between the flying opera company's obsession with Pang Pang and Yahitha's grumbling that she hadn't brought Yin Yang, Kyoshi was beginning to think the world would be better off if the Avatar simply reincarnated as a sky bison from now on. At least then it would be universally beloved. Alright, just sit, Yahitha said. Anywhere is fine as long as you give me some space in front of you. Kyoshi took her position. We're not doing incense, are we? She had had bad experiences with incense, to say the least. No, we're not doing incense. And Yahitha's approach seemed to forego as many spiritual trappings as possible. He'd left behind his ridiculous fake fire sage outfit and wore a simple cotton robe, notably devoid of any clan symbols. You know, I just thought of something, Kyoshi said as he sat down across from her. If it doesn't work out with Karuk, could you guide me to Yang Chen? She meditated between humans and spirits. Yahitha let out a long hiss through his teeth. I don't think Yang Chen will be able to help as much as you think. That's nonsense. Yang Chen was the perfect avatar. Or at least better than Karuk in every way possible. She'd be able to help me somehow. If you reached her, maybe. Some sages, including me, believe you have to go down the chain of your past lives in reverse order if you want to communicate with them. You can't talk to Yang Chen or the older avatars before you manage to connect with Karuk. Great, Kyoshi said, throwing her hands up and breaking her meditative posture. So on top of everything else, Karuk's a wall keeping me from my full potential. He's not I swear. I would have known, let me say that again. So on top of everything else, Karuk's a wall keeping me from my full potential. He's not I swear. I would have known you were his reincarnation from the start and saved the Earth Kingdom a lot of trouble had they brought you before me. You two are exactly alike. Kyoshi sputtered, indignant. Kyoshi sputtered, indignant to her very core. How dare! The nerve of him to insinuate such a... Yahitha quickly constructed a list on his fingers. You both idolize Yang Chen to a fault. You're both stubborn as rocks when it comes to what you want. And neither of you have any control over your emotions. Mark my words. You're going to botch up bad someday because of your personal feelings, just like he did. I'm glad you could tell all that from the 2 conversations we've had. Kyoshi had thought the days of mystical tutors, unilaterally declaring who she really was inside were over. but apparently not. Now, can we get down to business? Yahitha wiped his mouth and calmed himself to a state more becoming of an Avatar spiritual guide. There's a number of ways Karuk might talk to us, he explained. The most straightforward is if you were to simply have a vision of him. This method tends to be successful in locations excuse me. This method tends to be successful in locations with meaning from the past avatars. This spot right here was where Karuk would meditate and recover from his own spiritual journeys. A vision in an important location to a water avatar. That could explain his appearance in the Southern Air Temple. And she thought with some displeasure the wreckage he'd made of Yangchen's island. The downside is that any messages you get from a vision tend to be one way only, Yahitha said. Not as useful if you have to ask him questions. Another way to have more of a conversation is if he took over your body and spoke to me in person. I would have to relay whatever you want to ask him. Kyoshi frowned. She was distinctly uncomfortable with the idea of being possessed by someone else. Karuk was one of the last people she wanted controlling her body, even if he was her own past life. Yahitha noticed her reluctance. If you don't like that, the final method, which is the most difficult and least likely to happen after one session of practice, is if you manage to meditate your way into the spirit world. There, you could talk to him face to face. This is a level of communing that most people associate with the Avatar's abilities. It's the most efficient and clear way to draw on the wisdom of previous generations. He paused. But? Kyoshi asked. Karuk's spirit isn't necessarily going to be there to greet you, and your body is rendered physically helpless while your spirit is on the other side. And sometimes you don't remember anything you learned once you come back to the physical world. Maybe she was better off inhaling the gas inside the dirty tent. Communing doesn't sound like the great and useful power it's described to be. Nothing is useful until you practice it. Yahitha brought his hands together, fingers to fingers, palm to palm. After a deep breath, he drew them apart, creating a small flickering fire in the empty space. It hovered in the air, the size and gentleness of a candle flame. His voice lost its cantankerous edge. Focus your attention on the single flame, he said. It is one flame, and it is many. It changes with every moment. Kyoshi relaxed into the shape of her guide's words. No fire is ever the same fire, Yahitha said. No avatar is ever the same person. You and the flame change with every moment, every generation. You are one flame, and you are many. The sounds pouring forth from Yahitha turned into echoes of themselves, an overtone of reverberation. They lost their meaning and found their way. One and many. You are the flame. One out of many. one and the many. The clouds picked up speed. The trees whispered in her ears. The stars winked, yawned, and turned in for the night. Yahiza's voice became her own. She was repeating after him, unbidden, and the crowds of ourselves shouted back in response. A swearing-in ceremony where she was the leader and follower at once. And that is the end of that chapter. And now we go on to the next chapter, which is called The Message. Oh, I know, right? I was scrolling past, and I believe Karuk's voice, because it looks very italicized in a way. So I'm just like, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So I was waiting to get this chapter over with because I wanted to read this one. Okay. But yes, we go on to the message. The message. Oh, let me just drink some water first. Okay, the message. The ice of Agnicala, was so clear and pure, Kyoshi instinctively rubbed her arms to warm them. Despite the sudden shift, the yanking of her mind across the world, she knew exactly where she was and what she was looking at. She had the certainty of being here before. Okay, I'm gonna try and do the italicized ones in a different voice or a different expression of my voice. Hopefully it'll make sense. But this next part is italicized. I'll try to read it more, I don't know, mysticism or spiritual, I guess, in a way. But I think you'll get it. Okay. Yeah, she had the certainty of being here before. Karuk sat at a great feast. Long tables of ice laid out with raw and roasted meats. Choice slivers of fish. To him and the rest of his kinsmen, the glacial hall was warm and bright as could be with the heat from dozens of blubber lamps. And they had laughed at the shivering foreign dignitaries in red furs and green coats who tried to raise their cups with their thick mittens for toasts. Over the course of the night, he pried at his elders, asking them, "How did you know? What were the signs?" He hadn't ever bent the other elements until they told him. He hadn't ever bent the other elements until they told him to try, confident in his success. Weeks ago, he'd been astonished when the glowing crystal gave. Weeks ago, he'd been astonished when the glowing crystal they gave him rose into the air under his command. The sages of the Northern Water Tribe only gave him mischievous grins in response and assured him the unrevealed procedure had gone flawlessly, an auspicious sign of his era. Yang Chen's successor would be worthy of her legacy. Yang Chen's successor would be worthy of her legacy, and her peace would continue for 100 generations. Karuk gave up, smiled, and nodded. Though tonight was meant to be a celebration, everyone else's absolute certainty in him kept the joy from fully reaching his heart. Kyoshi was watching a memory of her past life. She stared at a young Karuk from every angle at once, recognizing what was going through his mind with each twitch of his handsome face. "Karuk!" she tried shouting, to no effect. Her voice left her body, but there was no round trip, no echo. These were images, not people who could hear her and talk back. Karuk, fuck you! Why are you messing with me? Stop! Okay. Stop giving me nightmares! Oh yeah. These were images. Yeah, these were images. Not people who could hear her and talk back. She was imprisoned, an audience in someone else's performance, forced to watch a play she had no chance of altering. Earthbending came so easy to him. Too easy. The rocks danced at his command, but his form was improper. His wizened master from Boston Say grunted. Too loose and wiggly. Not enough stamping around. He wasn't adopting the attitude of an earthbender. Karuk struggled with why the influence of his waterbending style was considered a detriment to the other forms of bending. The elements, they were all connected. One flowed into the next, sharing the same energy. He wished his older teachers could see that. To be of one mind instead of four wasn't to be of one mind instead of four. Wasn't that the strength of the Avatar? To constantly switch your identity back and forth? Waterbender, earthbender, waterbender, firebender, airbender. The strain would tear you apart. Surprisingly, the only person who agreed with him was a younger member of the Earth Kingdom delegation, some prissy kid from the Gan Jin tribe. Despite the difference in their personalities, Karuk began to hang out with Jianzu more and more. It was clear the uptight boy needed a friend, and the Avatar needed one too. He had plenty of people who liked him, but that wasn't the same thing as... Yeah, he had plenty of people who liked him, but that wasn't the same thing as true friendship. It took a surprisingly long time for the two of them to sit down at a pie show table together. By the time the first game concluded, Karuk's bond with Jianzu was absolute. The two of them put on their masks and suffered through the lecturing of their elders, all the way through his mastery of fire and air. Best to simply comply than fight tradition along every single front. He pretended to be a model student in front of his teachers, held his tongue on corrections he could have made to their forms. He even invented a technique that could have earned him arrows, a way to create a cushion of air under a heavy object, so that it could be slid and moved over a floor with ease. A perfect way to arrange all those statues they had lying around the air temples. The people who knew Karuk as a child would have been surprised at his good behavior. There was a reason for it, though. A reward that lay at the end of the elemental cycle. A sky bison. You could have all sorts of adventures once you had a flying mount at your disposal. The world opened up, unconstrained by distance. That was how one of the junior monks at the Southern Air Temple caught him and Jianzu sneaking into the pen, hoping to experiment with a joyride, and pinned them to the wall with a blast of air that rippled their cheeks for minutes on end. Jianzu's hair stuck up like cactus thorns as the two of them knelt in front of the abbot of the temple, and Karuk's elders trembling at what punishments they might receive. Idiots, they were told. Every avatar normally did a bit of independent. Every avatar normally did a bit of independent traveling. They could have simply waited for their chance. Now, on their first trip, they were going to be chaperoned into oblivion. The monk who had roughed them up so badly was assigned as a companion to the Avatar, despite his protests that he wanted nothing to do with two bison thieves. They were shocked to learn he was the same age as them, his hulking size and enviable beard making him seem older. It was a good punishment. The Avatar had his Kelsang fellow pegged for a no-fun grunt. No! Kyoshi threshed back and forth, unable to break free. No! She had weathered the nausea of having to look at a younger version of Giantu smile and enjoy himself. She'd swallowed her hate by reminding herself the man was dead. But seeing Kelsang again was too much. She couldn't warn him of the monster sliding into his life in disguise of a friend. She couldn't change his fate. She was watching a wave crash inexorably against the shore, where it would break up and dissipate, irrecoverable. The last member of their group would be an adult. The three of them would be accompanied by one of the strictest, harshest senior teachers at their royal academy. Sei Nakaman. A Sei Nakaman. The most powerful clan heads in the Fire Nation thought twice about trifling with a Sei Naka. But as fate would have it, the man got sick. He sent a younger relative in his stead, assuring them the arrangement would be only temporary. Karuk knew he had to pull every string he could to make it permanent once he saw Heiran. Yeah, because he fell in love with her. He was convinced the spirits had given him a vision that day in First Lord's Harbor. The girl who arrived was a walking dream of night black hair and fierce lips and eyes that cut like knives. He had to ask quickly. He had to make her feelings clear, while his heart pounded in his chest like a battle drum giving him. He had to make her feelings clear, while his heart pounded in his chest like a battle drum giving him the courage to approach someone so beautiful. He turned on his charm, a weapon that had never failed him in the past. It took less than a minute for Heiran to coldly proclaim she wasn't interested in a relationship with the Avatar. Giantu and Kelsang bonded for the first time over their mutual friend's mystery, slapping each other's backs and laughing at how brutally he'd been shot down. But while the two of them had their fun, they'd missed Heiran, giving Karuk a slow blink, a smirk, a little comment that romance was forbidden while on duty. Finally, world travel on a bison. As the breeze ruffled their hair, the sun warm on their skin. Karuk surprised his companions by asking for more bending training. Why? They asked. They were young, not the established experts in their disciplines. And Karuk was a bending prodigy, already a master of all four elements. What need did he have for further practice? He explained that the distinction between the best Paisho grandmasters and those journeymen who were only mediocre was that the true geniuses simply played more games than their lower-ranked counterparts did. Let me say that again, because I didn't fully understand. Oh, I love Warren. Okay. He explained that the distinction between the Best Pie Show grandmasters and those journeymen who were only mediocre was that the true geniuses simply played more games than their lower-ranked counterparts did. They never stopped learning. Yeah, they never stopped learning. Jianzu, Kelsang, uh, Heiran, they they could make the Avatar better. They could make each other better. Constant challenge was the key to growth. And so they practiced along the stops of their journeys. They practiced with each other, identifying and correcting and destroying each other's habits, until it felt like the four of them could speak without speaking, their spirits merging into a single pool. Karuk knew his companions had the potential for greatness, unorthodoxy, far beyond what their elders expected or even wanted of them. Hold on. Excuse me. Kelsing confirmed it one night when he admitted he visited the spirit world unintentionally. His descriptions of colorful, translucent creatures, talking plants, shifting landscapes had confused and upset the older monks who thought of the realm outside the physical as an austere place of blankness, mirroring the let me say it again. Oh, yes. His descriptions of colorful, translucent creatures, talking plants, shifting landscapes, had confused and upset the elder monks who thought of the realm outside the physical as an austere place of blankness, mirroring the detachment of the visitor. That was exactly it, Karuk said. The instant the facts disagreed with their preconceived notions, people lost their minds. That settled it. Kelsang was going to guide the Avatar. Kelsang was going to guide the Avatar to the spirit world. The monk agreed readily, eager for someone to share in the wonders he'd seen rather than ridicule him for it. They picked a meadow in the Earth Kingdom near. Yeah, they picked a meadow in the Earth Kingdom near Yaoping, where it was said Yang Chen liked to practice using the Avatar state to power her airbending. Kelsang and Karuk sat on the grass, facing each other. Though the exercise had been his idea, Karuk didn't still himself into meditation right away. He took a moment to watch Kelsang's breathing rustle the coarse hairs of his mustache. He felt Jianzu and Heiran's eyes on his back, their gazes filled with warmth. His friends. He loved them so much. Life was good. It was simply good. And the world was a wonderful place. Kyoshi's nails were wet. She had broken the skin of her palm. Blood trickled down her fingers. She could still see Kelsang's face. She'd seen the man who saved her life, who'd raised her. She'd seen her father's face. Karuk had gotten to spend so much time with him. Her eyes suddenly hurt. They stung from the light being drawn. Nyahitha was sitting on his Nyahitha was sitting with his back to the east, so the rising sun steamed over his shoulders. He looked at her with awe and confusion. "Your spirit left your body," he said. She didn't know. If she didn't know better, she would have sworn there was admiration in his voice. "I let the flame go after the first 10 minutes. Once it was clear you didn't need it. I've never seen anyone get the hang of journeying so quickly. Was Karuk there? Did he tell you about Father Glover? Did he tell you about Father Glover? Worm? I didn't find Karuk." Kyoshi sounded like she'd been strangled. Her words didn't belong to her. Only his memories. And they weren't the ones I was looking for. The visions had been torture. Seeing Kelsing laugh and throw his arms over the shoulder of the man who would one day slice his throat open and leave him to bleed out on a mountain. Watching Hayran in her prime, knowing she would be robbed of her strength and her honor. They had all started out as such good friends, and yet Karuk had let the people who loved him most drift away like chaff in the wind, down the paths to rumination. He should have done more for them. He should have fought harder to keep them together. "I didn't learn anything," Kyoshi choked out. "Only how much easier his life was than mine." Nyahitha looked at Kyoshi sadly. Then he snorted, clearing the contents of his nose into his throat. "All right, pack it up. We're done here. Fine by her. Is there another technique we can try? Maybe a different location?" "We could, but I don't think you'll do any better than you did just now. This is your limit." Nyahitha rose to his feet and dusted himself off. "You might be good at meditation, but you will never talk to Karuk or any of your other predecessors in the Avatar cycle if you cling to your resentments this hard. Karuk's flaws aren't keeping you from what you want. Yours are. You'll have to find another way to rescue you. You'll have to find another way to rescue you boy from Father Glowworm's clutches." In fury, Kyoshi crossed the distance and grabbed Nyahitha by the front of his robes. Ah, shit. It's not called out. She is called out. Very called out. In a fury, Kyoshi crossed the distance and grabbed Nyahitha by the front of his robes. He stared up at her calmly, as if he completely expected the threatening gesture. He had seen into her thoughts and found her wanting. She let go as sharply as she could. "Let me share with you some advice, the wisdom of my years," Nyahitha said, straightening the rumples she'd given him. "You can have your past, or you can have your future. Not both. We can try again once you understand this." Deciding his future lay back in town, he began to trek down the mountain. Kyoshi watched her erstwhile? No, I think it's erstwhile. Kyoshi watched her erstwhile guide walk away, feeling as powerless as she ever had. Coming here had been a mistake. She she shouldn't she should never have believed Karuk could give her could, could give her answers. There was nothing else she could do right now but follow in Yahitha's wake, bitterness swelling in her throat. Bitterness swelling in her throat. They hadn't gone far when the sage, perhaps sensing she was on the verge of tears, spoke up. I wasn't lying when I said you had the potential for great spiritual discipline, he said as he continued picking his way through the narrow path. You must have had a good teacher showing you the fundamentals. His pity was worse than his antagonism. You're not the first old man I've meditated with, if that's what you mean. She'd learned at the feet of a supposed immortal. It would have reflected poorly on her if she hadn't picked up a trick or two about the inner mind. Yahitha shrugged. Whoever it was has my regards. I could feel the vein between worlds thinning around your shoulders, Avatar. The spirits of the islands came through and spoke to you tonight. It's just a matter of time. It's just a matter if you can decipher their hidden messages. Dawn breaking further put the rugged handsomeness of the Fire Islands on full display. The sun gilded the fields below them, and from this high up, the disk of North Chengling looked like an artist's gentle stamp on a nature painting. But as the glare in her eyes lessened, restoring the farmed land to its natural colors, a jarring discrepancy arose. Kyoshi stopped where she was and pointed at the hillside. Kyoshi stopped where she was and pointed at the hillside Millennium field. Did the spirits do that? She asked. Because if they did, I think their message is pretty clear. The Millennium leaves created a dense blanket of vegetation over the soil. But many of the plants had, in a single night, dried and turned sickly yellow in swaths that stood out clearly against their green surroundings. From this distance, the dying crops formed patterns that looked like giant brushstrokes. And the perfectly legible characters they spelled out were Hail Fire Lord Shaijin. And that is the end of that chapter. I don't think any spirits did that. Well, maybe? No, I don't think so. I think people did that. Okay. And now, we go on to the next chapter. Yeah. It might have been the spirits, but I don't think spirits really care. Unless it was Yoon's work. Like, Yoon and Father Glowworm together did this, but I'm pretty sure people did it. I'm like hot, like very sure. Okay. Alright, but this one, the next chapter is called Interlude, Survival. Interlude, Survival. Yoon threw up his hands as Father Glowworm bore down on him. This is it, he thought. This is where it ends. The boy who turned out to be nothing would fittingly vanish without a trace. But his body was stronger than his will. Out of sheer memory and practice, the forms carved into his muscles and bones, his gesture of surrender turned into a sky-piercing fist, an uppercut. The earth that loved him when nothing else would. He would have known that even in his lowest moment, he would never be abandoned by his element. A focused blast of mud and loosened rocks lashed Father Glowworm across the iris. The spirit shrieked and halted its charge. Yoon stared at his own hand in shock, as if this were the very first act of moving earth he'd ever performed. Tears welled in his eyes, blurring his vision. Oh, look! He wiped his face with his arm and sniffed. I can bend here. The duel raged for 3 days and 3 nights, is how his fable would have gone, if told by another. In truth, he didn't know how long he battled Father Glowworm. Time seemed to work differently here. At one point, he remembered crawling on his hands and knees for the edge of the swamp, willing to put his lips to the bottom of the puddle, needing to drink more than he wanted to defend himself. But tendrils of slime had blocked his path, forcing him to turn and continue to fight. It was no longer about predator and prey, but whose hatred and stubbornness would see them through. Yoon had to strategize which parts of his body he could sacrifice, like he was one of the wound dummies he and Master Amok used to practice on. A twisted elbow was better than a broken rib. Bleeding from the head was fine, but he had to protect his arteries. Above all, he could not lose consciousness, whether to exhaustion or a knockout blow. And he gave as good as he got. He battered the spirit with columns of solid stone, sprayed it with clouds of pebbles, sprayed it with clouds of pebbles, nearly caught it in a giant hand of mud. An observation throughout the fight gave him slivers of hope, peeking through like rays of sunshine. Every time he struck home and truly wounded the spirit, it shrunk in size, a marker of progress. So, Yoon wheezed during a lull while bent at the waist and heavy and heaving for breath. How do I stack up against Karuk? His blood and sweat dripped off the tip of his nose, pattering and mingling on the ground. I have it on good authority I'm his equal when it comes to earthbending. His enemy continued to flit through the trees, but at a slower, ragged pace. The spirit had lost control over much of its slime. It had fewer weapons to work with. You presumptuous little stain. If Avatar Karuk hadn't weakened me all those years ago, I would have finished you in an instant. And yet here I am! Yoon screamed. wasting precious air, agonizing his own torn muscles. How inconvenient for you! Father Glowworm chuckled, knowing Yoon could have been addressing someone else. Yes, the spirit said, considering his words. You are more trouble than you're worth. There are easier meals to be had. It gapped itself between two slender trunks, looking like a vertical squint in contemplation. Father Glowworm had started the battle the size. Yeah, Father Glowworm had started the battle the size of a wagon wheel, but was now no bigger than an overgrown calabash. Calabash. Now I'm just like, what's calabash? Calabash. Oh yeah, that's very small. Yeah, he is now very, very small. Yeah, Father Glowworm had started the battle the size of a wagon wheel, but was now no bigger than an overgrown calabash. What do you say to a truce of sorts? I have a proposition for you. After earthbending in Pai Sho, deal-making was what Yoon excelled at. He pressed a thumb to one nostril and expelled a clot of blood from the other. I'm listening. I could grant you some of my power. You'd be able to create passage between the worlds of human and spirit. In return, you would bring people to me. Not many. I don't want to become well known. I could get back home. Sacrificing innocence did not sit with you, but it was important to hear the other side's entire terms during a negotiation, no matter how outrageous. What does it take for you to give me such power? Our forms need to intertwine, but only briefly. It's a simple act, physical one. You would possess me, pass through me, call it whatever you wish, as long as we both let our guards down enough to merge together. The spirit turned magnanimous with its explanation, revealing more than it felt it needed. Revealing more than what felt was needed. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Maybe it's like a similar bond with that Juan had with Rava. In a way, if that makes sense. But he's not like the Avatar. He just has increased power or whatever. I wouldn't think maybe, but he's not. He's just like evil. No, I don't think evil, Avatar. I think just evil. just evil. Like, evil possessed person. Oh my god, okay. I just kept reading. Okay. Let me just keep on reading. Okay. Uh, you would possess me? Pass through me? Call it whatever you wish, as long as we both let our guards down long enough to merge together. The spirit turned magnanimous in its explanation, revealing more than it felt was needed. You might notice some changes to your physical nature as a result, but it's no issue. If anything, you become stronger. You knew a double-edged statement when he heard one, but keeping his good looks was not a concern. He fought through the pain of his arm. He fought through the pain in his arm and held his hands up. No sudden earthbending moves. I accept. Father Glowworm relaxed its tendrils. A layer of slime blanketed the ground. Come closer. Come closer. Yoon approached slowly. Scattered teeth rolled under his feet, and trails of mucus clung to his soles. Nestled in the fork of the tree, Father Glowworm pulsed with anticipation. The branches surrounding it looked like part of the face. During their fight, it had never left the partial cover of the grove. Yoon remembered how the spirit had preferred to remain within the stone tunnel Jianzu had opened in the mountain, back in Shishan. An unprotected eye needed an unprotected eye needed a socket. Yeah, an unprotected eye needed a socket. A welcoming energy radiated from the spirit, promising terrible transformation. The liquid dissolution and rebirth of a larvae wrapped in its cocoon. Hold on. Yeah, welcoming energy radiated from the spirit, promising terrible transformation. The liquid dissolution and rebirth of a larvae wrapped in its cocoon. It had opened to him. It had made itself ready for its end of the bargain. So had you. He threw his hands apart. The entire floor of the grove followed them. The ground layer containing the roots of the trees washed to the left and right, dividing right down to the middle in a line that ran under Father Glowworm. The spirit suddenly had its clothing and protection stripped away by the tidal act of earthbending. It fell to a new level of the ground Yoon created, and howled in surprise. Yoon nearly did the same. The brute force act had taken every ounce of his power. Kyoshi could have done it easily, but the entire effort of washing away the topsoil had almost killed him. He had one last move to make. hurling his arms back together in a hug almost. He caught Father Glowworm in the jaws of an earthen vice. Crushed in his stony grip, the spirit shrank further. Wretched boy! The spirit wriggled with impotent fury. I offered you power and you resort to tricks? Not even Karuk would have disgraced himself in such a... Ah! Yoon closed his thumb and forefinger. The boulders squeezed closer together. Shut up about Karuk. Under his unrelenting pressure, Father Glowworm had been crushed down to the volume of a sea prune. Stop! Without merging with me, you can't return to your home. I know. Yoon reached out and plucked the shrunken eye from the rock. It was wet and sticky like a sea prune too. It's just gonna be on my terms, not yours. What are you doing? Father Glowworm shrieked in his fingers, no less loud for its diminished size. What exactly are you going to do to me? Yeah, no, let me say that again. Exactly what were you going to do with me? No. Let me say that again. What are you doing? Father Glowworm shrieked in his fingers, no less loud for a diminished size. Exactly what you were going to do to me. Without giving it any further consideration, Yoon popped the eyeball into his mouth. The sphere burst between his teeth. The bitter taste of the jelly inside washed over his tongue, and a scream ran through his limbs, vibrating his bones like the strings of an who. The sickly clouds overhead fled from the cover. Yeah, the sickly clouds overheard. Sorry, I'm blinking so hard right now. The sickly clouds overhead fled for the cover of the horizon. He could feel the trees hiding their faces in shame. He didn't need to be told by an older, wiser master. He didn't need to be told by an older, wiser master to understand. Combining with an immortal being in such a sacrilegious way created a permanent hole in the weave. It was a crime against order, an abhorrent violation of spiritual balance. Yoon swallowed his mouthful and let change overcome him. He'd never been a picky eater. And that is the end of that chapter. So this confirms he is actually evil. He's not possessed. He's just evil. Yeah, he ate that shit. He made sure he was small enough so he didn't overpower him. And he fucking ate him. That's fucking gross. Ew. Ew. Yeah, it's just evil Yoon. It's not possessed evil Yoon like we thought. It's just evil Yoon. Water. Okay. Okay. The next chapter I'm going to be reading is called Resignation. Resignation. Actually, wait just a second. Let me just open my window. Because it is... I need some air. I think after this, I'm gonna get a margarita. I feel like a margarita. Alright. Ah, that air feels so nice. Okay. So the next chapter is called Resignation. Kyoshi and Kyoshi and Yahitha ran down the mountain as fast as his old bones would let him, which, in his panic, was surprisingly fast. The spirits speak in subtle ways, do they? She yelled at him. She skidded over a patch of wet rock, nearly turning her ankles. What she would have given for the hidden forces behind the movement of the world to stay hidden in her life. This isn't a spiritual message. It's a declaration of war. If either the Salwan or the Kelso see this, North Chunglin will drown in blood. He was right. Sheijin had been working the angle of being favored by entities beyond the physical realm. The sudden, inexplicable appearance of this message overnight would infuriate Zoryu's supporters and embolden his own. If a single misplaced banner could cause a fight to break out, a provocation of this size could be the prelude to a full-blown riot. It didn't make sense why the spirits would care which brother sat on the throne. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. Like, even back to the first Avatar, the spirits really didn't care about human affairs. They didn't care about, the physical world and, what was happening there. I doubt they're gonna care about what's happening now. So yeah, someone did this. Nope, they didn't. Not at all. Man, I want to see Legend of Korra again. Jesus, it's so good. And that whole, Avatar origin story was so good. Yeah, unless they fucked with the spirit world. Yeah, exactly. Unless they did something that spirits don't care. Spirits absolutely do not care. Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yes, but where was I? Yeah, it didn't make sense why spirits would care which brother sat on the throne. Did Cheijin's training at the High Temple earn him some kind of goodwill with the islands themselves? Had he struck some kind of supernatural bargain? Despite the visions she'd had, the foe she was trying to rescue Yoon from, she couldn't bring herself to believe the spirits would scrawl someone's name into the landscape like a vandal. And it didn't seem like Nyahitha did either. It occurred to her she had no way of undoing the message, not unless she was willing and capable of destroying the entire hillside or setting the last remaining crops of not unless she was willing and capable of destroying the entire hillside or setting the last remaining crops of a hungry village ablaze. She could see Shaijin's smug grin, taunting her as she ran. The Avatar can't fight history. She and Yahitha were only hurrying toward the inevitable. By the time they reached the village center, astonished people were already stumbling out of their homes to stare at the giant writing. Oh shit. Oh no. That's bad. Nyahitha came to a stop and doubled over, his hands on his knees. We're too late, he said over his heaving gasps for breath. Inhaling so much gas would not have been good for his endurance. Find my friends and tell them what happened. The Avatar was going to be needed here in the middle of North Chungling. The Sawan and the Kelso clansmen were beginning to gather in force. From one side of the square, Sanshur and a very large group of toughs filed in. These were battle-scarred men Kyoshi hadn't seen before at the fair or around town. Based on the way they carried themselves, she guessed they were seasoned fighters and guardsmen that must have come from other settlements on the Shuhan Island. After seeing Huazo arrive yesterday, Sanshur had called for backup from his clan. The Sawan contingent packed the opposite end, basking in what the dawn had brought. The men behind Huazo and Kowlin laughed and cheered for the ostensible. Hold on. I feel like I'm not saying that word right. Ostensible. Okay. I was in fact saying it right. The men behind Huazo and Kowlin laughed and cheered for the ostensible will of the spirits. It was too early for anyone to have put on armor, so they were dressed in wide-sleeved cotton summer robes. Ugh. Sorry, I keep on burping. Okay. It was too early for anyone to have put on armor, so they were dressed in wide-sleeved cotton summer robes, printed with bright red and white stone camellias. The disparity between the Sawan's crisp, boldly dried fabrics and the faded, tattered rags of the Kaoso locals made the choice of clothing look more like mockery than fitting in. Sanshur! Huazo called out. For a delicate-looking person, she had a powerful voice when she needed it. Look at what the spirits had wrought. Spirits nothing, Sanshur screamed. His face was scarlet as Huazo's outer jacket. Mark my words, this is Sawan treachery, and not else. His outrage couldn't hide the fact that he was speaking for the benefit of the villagers who weren't die-hard Kaoso loyalists. He was deathly afraid of the stain this message would leave on his clan. Men who were fearful for their image tended to act rashly, and in this regard, Sanshur was no different than the boy in Long Kao who'd attacked Kyoshi with a rusty dowel. At his signal, the Kaoso battle line began edging forward. Huazo wasn't fazed. The smirk she shared with her niece said she wanted this clash just as much as Sanshur. Why don't we ask the Avatar how to interpret these symbols? She's right over there. Avatar Kyoshi! Can you read? You can read, can you not? How should we interpret this miracle? Do you think our dear departed Lord Shiryu might be speaking to us from the great beyond? Kyoshi tried to come up with a relevant answer that would both make her sound like a spiritual authority and change the direction this encounter was headed, but there was nothing she could say as loudly as the entire hillside. She ran into the middle of the shrinking space. She ran into the middle of the shrinking space between the two clans. Stand down, all of you, she shouted. Karuk's Metamarines had been a stage play, but here she was the actor now, not the audience. And a bad performance could lead to a national disaster. I want everyone to go back to their rooms immediately. Right, because there's nothing to see here, the Sawan man hooted. Get out of the way, Avatar, Sandshirk yelled. This isn't a foreigner's business. Insults and perfidy of this size need to be answered, holy day or not. The taboo against Admikais during the festival was working against her. Another time of the year, the clans could have satisfied their honor through the firebending duel. Without the release the ritual provided, the situation was dissolving into something more dangerous and unknowable. Kuwazu stood fast. Her men streamed past her like river water around a stone. Kowlin marched at their head, the older Sawan warriors confident in her as the point of their spear. What do you think? What? That's not the answer I wanted. Shut up, no one asked. Yeah, basically. Tell us what we want to hear and nothing else. Yeah. Yeah, Calvin marched at their head, the older Sawan warriors confident in her as the point of their spear. Kyoshi heard footsteps rushing at her from behind. It was Rangi. Without so much as a nod, her bodyguard stepped neatly in to cover. Her flank, fitting the Avatar as closely as a hilt to the blade. She looked haggard and exhausted, like she'd spent all night awake worrying about Kyoshi's spiritual trials. But she was here, thank the stars. Now, together, they stood a chance at keeping the peace. The two clans closed in, catching them between the jaws of a vice. Listen to the Avatar! Rangi shouted at the Kaoso. As a member of the Fire Nation and a neutral clan, hopefully she could arbitrate successfully. Kyoshi is the highest-ranking firebender present. Peer to the crown and the final word when it comes to the spirits. You are beholden to her as much as you would be to Seto himself. She turned to address the Sawan and her former classmate. Kowlin, Rangi pleaded quietly. Kowlin, Rangi pleaded quietly. Help us stop this. You don't need to bear your aunt's grudges for her. I'm begging you. Kowlin raised a hand, halting the Sawan advance. She came closer, alone. She paused in front of Kyoshi and Rengi and gave them a warm, thoughtful smile. Oh, Rengi, she said, my dear friend. She lowered her voice so only Kyoshi and Rengi could hear. Kowlin's pleasant, pretty features twisted into a disdain so deep it cast grooves in her face. Of course the daughter of a shorn, honorless animal would resort to begging, she whispered, with the deliberate intent of an assassin. Rengi blinked. She nodded. Then, before Kyoshi could stop her, she struck Kowlin across the jaw. That is our girl right there. No one talks about her mom that way. Bam! And now all hell is probably gonna break loose. The Sawan had found their excuse in Rengi's attack. The Kaoso took it as an example to follow. All around Kyoshi, the rival clan members roared and charged each other. She was still trying to process what had just happened when a man slammed into her back. She whirled around and flung the offender to the side, bowling over two of his kinsmen, or his enemies. Already, the lions had merged into a pitched brawl with no defined front. Kaoso and Sawan fought each other tooth and nail, and everything short of drawn blades, with everything short of drawn blades and firebending. Kyoshi spun the balls of her feet and lunged, sending a whirling blast of wind hurtling at the biggest clump of people she could pick out. It flattened them like wheat in a storm, but with the combatants already locked together, they simply continued their fight on the ground, grappling in the dust. Thrashing bodies piled up at her wrists like snowdrifts, impeding her movements. She forced her way to pocket the space that had formed around Rengi and Kowlin, who also had disappeared, leaving her niece to manage things. Rengi raised her hand to Kyoshi, a silent order not to interfere. Kowlin wiped the blood off her smirk. The blow had been hard, but she rolled with it, expecting and wanting it. What do you say? She asked Rengi. After curfew rules, no burns or close fists? I was thinking the same thing, Rengi replied. The two of them walked right up to each other. Instead of resorting to graceful punches and kicks and the long, far-reaching style Kyoshi was accustomed to seeing from firebenders, they grabbed at the backs of each other's necks and fell into an exchange of brutal, vicious strikes with their knees and elbows. The first blast of heat made Kyoshi think they'd broken the festival's prohibitions. But then she remembered skilled firebenders could do extreme damage in the concussive force of their bending alone. Each time ranking Kowlin rammed a knee into the other's ribs or aimed an elbow at their opponent's temple, they let out a shockwave that rattled Kyoshi's teeth. There was no way they could keep this up. They absorbed each other's blows with their shins and forearms. Hold on. Hold on, sorry. Where was I? Yeah, there was no way they could keep this up. They absorbed each other's blows into their with their shins and forearms, their skin reddening from towing the line of open flame. Calvin attempted to smash her forehead into Rangi's eye, and just barely missed, cutting a gash along the cheekbone. Rangi staggered away, her knees wobbling. Calvin followed in pursuit, hungry to exploit her advantage, but she'd fallen into a trap. With the extra space, Rangi turned her back to Kowlin and leaped into the air. It was a move few others but Kyoshi would recognize, jet-stepping, but not the way Rangi had used it in Chameleon Bay. Flames shot out from only one of her feet, propelling her into a backflip, pinwheeling her around with extra speed and force. Her knee came crashing down on Kowlin's head like a sledgehammer. Jesus Christ. Kowlin was out before she hit the ground. She fell face first, as limp as a wet rag. The whole fight had passed in seconds. Rangi, breathing heavily from exertion and pain, but somehow completely calm, crawled on her knees over Kowlin. Without hesitation, she turned the unconscious girl over and raised her fist to strike her helpless opponent again. "What are you doing?" Kyoshi screamed. She grabbed at Rangi and pulled her off Kowlin. Rangi struggled to find an answer. Horror seized her as her mind finally caught up with her body. "I'm gonna kill her, that's what." Oh yeah. Definitely. The horror seized her as her mind finally caught up with her body. She stared at the roiling battle she'd sparked over the town square, and then at Kowlin, who wasn't moving at all. Kyoshi had seen Rangi start a fight once, on a Lei-Tai platform, but it had been a calculated maneuver, not a complete breakdown. If the madness of family honor could make someone as disciplined as Rangi lose control, then there was no telling what could happen if this violence burst the bounds of North Chungling and Shuhan Island. Take her to Sifu Atwat, Kyoshi ordered. Still in shock, Rangi laced her arm around Kowlin's and slung the girl over her shoulders. She staggered, though, through the melee, threading into the open spaces she could find. Kyoshi had to trust in luck and whatever remained of clan honor, that no one would strike them from behind. She couldn't use Earth in the frenzy, not without risking serious injury to her targets. She resorted to pulling Kaoso and Saowon apart with her bare hands, hurling opponents as far away from each other as she could. Sometimes she had to crack their skulls together first, pair by pair. She worked her way through the crowd, creating peace through brute force. I like that. She worked her way through the crowd, creating peace through brute force. I think that pretty much sums up how what Avatar Kyoshi, very Batman. Very. Hold on, just 1 second. I need to adjust myself because my butt is really not good. Okay. Uh, yeah. Pair by pair, she worked her way through the crowd, creating peace through brute force. Kyoshi spotted Jinpa coming to her, quelling the violence in his own way. Many of the fighters simply stopped when they saw him, the grace of an air nomad enough to calm their tempers. The ones who didn't, he would depart with his staff, smacking them on the shins and hands like an angry school teacher until they let go of their enemies. Avatar! He yelled. Their combined efforts their combined efforts were working slowly, and you could hear him over the lessening din. Atwat set up a field hospital in one of the restaurants. He pointed to one of the buildings closer to the Sawan side. Our inn didn't have enough space to hold the injured. Ranky's there right now. The village bystanders were already dragging the more badly beaten warriors in that direction. Kyoshi was going to tell Jinpa he'd done well, that their whole team, despite its many mistakes and humiliations and failures since coming to North Chungling, had done well. But when she looked around and saw the brawl dying down to its embers, there was no reassurance. Only the pounding thought in her head that everyone in the village was here, watching the fight or participating in the fight or recovering from the fight. A deep, queasy sickness rippled through her core. "Where's Heiran?" she said. "Who's with her?" "She's still back in our inn, by herself." Jinpa realized it too and swore a curse unbecoming of his people. This whole showdown, a more perfect diversion could not have been designed. I fucking knew it. I knew it. I knew it. I called it. I totally called it. Totally. Oh my god. Yes. This was just a fucking distraction. Oh my god. I am a genius. Genius. Fucking genius. This whole showdown, a more perfect diversion could not have been designed. After all, why would Yoon switch tactics if she kept falling for them? Kyoshi barreled straight for the inn she hadn't slept in yet, knocking men down, trampling them in her haste. Jinpa fell behind, struck by the neck and knocked to the ground by an errant Sawan elbow. There was no time to wait for him to rise to his feet and shake it off. She had to get to Heiran. The street she was trying to reach lay several blocks away from the square, and as she gained distance from the noise, a ghostly silence. Yeah, and as she gained distance from the noise, a ghostly silence fell over her like a cloak. Her own footsteps and ragged breathing were louder than the clash of knuckles on bone she had been listening to until now. She found the corner where the man from yesterday had nearly caved in his nephew's head and went inside the inn. Inside, the common room was warm, cheery, and well lit. This establishment was deep in the Kaoso side of town, so the cushions and throw rugs adorned with the winged peony lay over every surface that would hold them. A pie show board made of weathered wood had been set up in the middle of the floor. On one side sat Heiran, the other, Yoon. "Don't move, Kyoshi," Yoon said. Hold on. Okay, I am back. I was being pranked. Okay. Alrighty. Where was I? Yeah. On one side sat Heiran, the other Yoon. Don't move, Kyoshi, Yoon said. She's in grave danger right now. His eyes stayed on the board, examining the game that lay in its middle stages. He had been forcing Ranky's mother to play. Instead of his Earth Kingdom clothes, Yoon wore pilfered Sawan robes, a stone camellia emblazoned on his shoulder. He'd snuck through the chaos outside by blending in. No bending tricks, just the skills of an infiltrator. His learning made possible by the women who sat across him. Yeah, his learning made possible by the women who sat across from him. Kyoshi, remember what I told you. Heiran spoke with the same calm determination she had before cutting her hair and letting go of her honor. Now she was ready to give what little she had left. Remember what's important. You won't get a better opportunity than this. Yoon placed a tile with finality, making the sharp click against the board that signaled the pieces had been carved from high-quality stone. My victory in 18 moves, Sifu, he said. No need to continue. It's over. Heiran bobbed her head in agreement. The Paisho tiles flew from the board. The Paisho tiles flew from the board into Yoon's hand, following his motions. In an instant, they merged and reformed into a long, thin pike that he pointed at the base of Heiran's neck. Kyoshi screamed and threw her hands up, pushing against the dagger with her earth bending. But Yoon maintained his grip on the stone. His bending opposed hers, the same way she and Jiantu had warred against each other in the stone tea house of Jinchao. Only, right here and right now, Yoon was stronger than Jiantu. Despite Kyoshi's resistance the entire way, he sank the dagger into Heiran's throat. Oh my god. And that is the end of that chapter. Yes, fuck, dude. Jeez, he's actually evil. It's not the spirit doing this, it's him. He's not possessed, he's just very, very, very upset. And he's getting his dues. Yeah, he's real crossed right now. Oh, Jesus. Okay. I think this will be the last one. Oh my god, dude. Either this one or the next one. Damn, I have read a lot today, and I'm pretty proud of myself. Okay. Jesus. He's actually evil, not possessed evil. And I'm just like, man, you're very, very bitter right now, Yoon. Okay. But the next chapter, uh, is called Weakness. Weakness. Over the sound of the Avatar shrieking, Yoon and Heiran stared at each other. He held onto the stone pike, as if he wanted to maintain a physical connection to her death, the same way he had embraced Jianzu while killing him. He gave her a parting smile, but Heiran wasn't ready to say farewell just yet. Her bronze eyes flared with clarity and purpose. As blood welled from her wound, she grabbed Yoon by the wrist. She choked involuntarily, her back spasming, and pulled him closer. The dagger plunged deeper into her body. Yoon frowned, not expecting this. He tried to pull his hand away but couldn't. Heiran's final muster of strength hadn't turned her into iron. Scarlet trails poured from her lips, but she never took her eyes off her former student. Heiran raised a hand, and with an effort Kyoshi could see was killing her as much as the blood filling her lungs. She summoned a ball of flame. The blaze in her grasp made her look like a Fire Lord captured in portrait, unconquered to the end. She thrust her palm into Yoon. Hold on just 1 second. Oh, okay. Okay. All right. The blaze in her grasp made her look like a Fire Lord captured in portrait, unconquered to the end. She thrust her palm into Yoon. He managed to break free and twist to the side right before the fire punched through his torso. His shoulder still got caught in the flames and he hissed in pain, shoving Heiran into the floor, the motion withdrawing the dagger with a sickening wet sound. He ran up the stairs leading from the common room to the upper level of the inn, clutching his burned arm. Kyoshi couldn't stop him. The mission was forgotten. The plan was nothing. Sorry to stop, but I needed to put chapstick on. Yeah. Kyoshi couldn't stop him. The mission was forgotten. The plan was nothing. She had to help Ranky's mother. She dashed to Heiran's side and tried to wrap her mind around the grievous wound to figure out her next action. Heiran's fading expression was one of fury, reserved for the Avatar alone. Go after him, she gurgled at Kyoshi through her own blood. Yoon had opted for a second-story escape. He was wounded. Kyoshi could have caught up to him with dust stepping, her secret advantage from the Flying Opera Company that allowed her to speed along rooftops, but to do so would have meant letting Heiran bleed out. It would have meant Rangi losing her mother again. She bunched up her sleeves and clamped them into the tunnel of Heiran's throat. Blood kept slipping through her fingers, listening to give her hope. Yeah, listen. Yeah. Let me say that again. Man, I'm tripping up right here. Blood kept slipping through her fingers, listening to give her hope, then pouring out harder in waves. She realized it was the pattern of a heartbeat. She had no time to lose. Yeah, I think he might have fucking cut her, the important vein in the neck. I don't know which one that's called, but that one. That's why it sounds like a heartbeat. She had no time to lose. She picked Heiran's upper body off the floor in preparation for moving her. No! The headmistress sputtered. Kyoshi! There was a final burst of indignation from the headmistress's eyes, outrage at the weakness of the Avatar before they closed. Kyoshi had thrown away her chance to fulfill her duty. She couldn't do what needed to be done. There would be consequences for choosing her personal attachments over all else in the long run. But right now, she had to hold on to Rangi's mother as tightly as she could. She lifted Heiran, and out of the door in the opposite direction, Yoon had gone. They needed a miracle, one who was currently on the other side of town. Kyoshi sat inside the coral urchin noodle shop with Nyahitha and Junpei. The restaurant had been closed for the holiday, so it was dark and the stoves were cold. The long wooden tables took up most of the floor space. They paid the owner handsomely to take over his apartments upstairs as well, where Atuat worked on Heiran, Rangi by their side. Kyoshi looked around the dark, not a table at Junpa and Nyahitha. The airless airbender and the mock fire sage. Under normal circumstances, these two men would have been her spiritual advisors. What a trio they made. Wait, let me say that again. My mind is like not working right now. I read the airless airbender as another person. I was just like, wait, what? That doesn't make sense. Okay, yeah. Kyoshi looked around the dark, knotted table at Junpa and Nyahitha, the airless airbender and the mock fire sage. Under normal circumstances, these two men would have been her spiritual advisors. What a trio they made. The fighting seems to have stopped, Junpa said. He'd been searching for something positive to say for a while. Only for the moment, Nyahitha said. There's too many injured on both sides. Even worse, a few of the younger, stupider fighters met outside the town square, and broke the taboo on harmful firebending during holiday. The Saowan and the Kaoso will lick their wounds for a bit, and then the conflict will spill the borders of North Changling. Each of the clans thinks they have just cause to attack the other now. There's nothing we can do? Junpa asked. This is what the beginnings of wars in the Fire Nation look like, Nyahitha said. If Agni Kai's and the Avatar If Agni Kai's and Avatar meditations didn't work in the past, I don't know how they'll work now. Kyoshi rested her forehead against her knuckles and stared at the whirling patterns in the wood grain. The situation between the rival clans had been precarious already, but her decision to come to North Chungling had pushed the country over the edge. She was to blame for whatever happened next. And she had squandered the chance the Heiran had given her to take Yoon down. She had violated her promise to Rangi to keep her mother from harm. She couldn't simply fail along one path like most people. She had to be torn apart by her failures in every direction. How much time do you think we have before fighting begins in earnest? She asked. A few days, Yahitha said. If you have a plan, it had better be simple and quick. She had no plan. She had nothing. Achuat came down the stairs, wiping her blood, wiping her hands with a clean towel. Thankfully, there was no blood on it. She's absolutely livid with you, the doctor said to Kyoshi. Which one? Both. Achuat motioned her thumb up the stairs, where her mother and daughter waited. I would not want to be you right now. There was nowhere left to show any courage but here. Her reckoning. Kyoshi accepted the pitying looks of Jinpa and Yahitha and went to go see Rangi and Heiran. Okay, cool. So Heiran's still alive, but she's really hurt. She was gonna be super dead if she didn't get help. She's pissed. Oh, yeah. Super pissed. Kyoshi accepted the pitying looks of Jinpa and Yahitha and went to go see Rangi and Heiran. She could tell the room was hotter before she entered it. Kyoshi ducked inside the restaurant's sleeping quarters and saw Heiran propped up on a small bed, a thick layer of bandages swaddling her neck. She was pale from the blood loss, which only offset the anger shooting from her eyes. On the table beside her was a piece of slate and several lumps of chalk, taken from the order boards of the restaurant downstairs. She must have been using it to communicate with Achuat and Rangi, unable to talk from her injury. Rangi stood at the foot of the bed. So stock still, Kyoshi wondered how much Rangi had stood at the foot of the bed. So stock still, Kyoshi wondered how much Heiran had revealed to her about the conversation they had had by themselves in the palace stables, about the tactic of luring Yoon out in the open. You used my mother as bait, Rangi hissed. Apparently everything. I didn't agree to the plan, Kyoshi said weakly. Right, you just went along. Neutral Jing, huh? You kept quiet and you didn't tell me you meant to sacrifice. You kept quiet and you didn't tell me she meant to sacrifice herself? Let me say that again. I'm saying it in the wrong tone. Right. You just went along. Neutral Jing, huh? You kept quiet and you didn't tell me she meant to sacrifice herself. Would you have mentioned it over her corpse? Would you have told me then? She wasn't describing the truth of Kyoshi's thoughts, but thoughts didn't matter. Only actions and their outcomes. Rangi, please, I'm sorry. Don't apologize to me. Rangi said. There's no need. Because from this point on, I am nothing to you. Do you hear me, Avatar Kyoshi? Nothing. She brushed past Kyoshi and ran downstairs. Kyoshi barely saw her leave. She was too stuck on what Rangi called her. She couldn't remember Rangi addressing her as Avatar Kyoshi during the entire time they'd known each other. Not in Yokia, not in Chameleon Bay, not in Hujiang or Zigon. Hearing those words from her lips was like a blade coming down between them, cold and sharp and final. Kyoshi's body began to heave. She took great dry gulps, her insides twisting. Ever since Jianzu had taken Rangi, she'd been so fixated on what outside dangers might separate them. She'd never thought about losing her by saying the wrong thing or being silent at the wrong time. She couldn't breathe. She didn't want to. This wasn't a future she could face. She was imprisoned again, like she'd been in Karuk's memories, forced to watch proceedings that she couldn't bear to witness. There was a precise little flick against Kyoshi's forehead. Something white and powdery fell to the floor. Heiran had thrown a piece of chalk at her. The headmistress held up her slate and tapped its surface, showing Kyoshi what she'd written. Stop panicking, it said. She's not leaving you. But she said Kyoshi was a blubbering mess. A wreck threatened to spill its contents into the sea. Heiran rolled her eyes, rubbed the slate clean, and wrote more on it with a fresh piece of chalk. Her strokes were so fast and efficient, she could have outspaced some speakers. She was a career teacher, after all. She says a lot of things. Yes, she's angry with you. It doesn't mean she'll walk away forever. Rangi had walked away while making it sound like forever. How do you know? Rub, scrape. She's my daughter. You think you know her so well. I've known her since she was born. Heiran turned the board over to use the back. Eventually she'll come back with some sign she still cares. It usually takes her a week to forgive me. Give it time. Kyoshi wiped her face, sniffling like a child. It wasn't easy to recover from such a blow. What if Heiran was wrong? She's still in love with you. She's just pissed. Chill out. Basically the energy that she's giving Kyoshi. Yeah. Fucking Rangi's just really angry. Where was I? Yeah. Kyoshi wiped her face, sniffling like a child. It wasn't easy to recover from such a blow. What if Heiran was wrong? The headmistress wasn't going to give her time to ponder the issue. Yoon? I searched the town with the help of some of the more reasonable locals. He's gone. He could be anywhere in Shuhan Island, or he may have escaped by sea. You missed your opportunity. Heiran was less angry and judgmental this time. She was simply stating the facts. I couldn't leave you to die. For Rangi's sake, I couldn't. Heiran sighed, wheezing through her nose. The exaltation aggravated her wound, and she coughed pink spittle. Kyoshi moved toward her, but she put her hands up to say she was fine. She resumed writing, the chalk dust thick on the slate by now. He's not the only thing driving us to war anymore. The Sawan and the Kaoso will use today as a just cause to fight. They'll say they were defending their honor. Kyoshi stared at the strokes of chalk, not out of a lack of understanding, but because this character spurred a recollection in her. She had to dig for it, feel it brush against her fingers, before she could grasp it. To help the process along, she reached out with her earthbending, applying the gentlest of force against Heiran's board. At the touch of her bending, the mineral chalk swept clean off the slate. With Kyoshi's level of control, that was the best she could manage. Even with her fans, she never had the fine-tuning to be able to create words in earth. But she knew someone who could do that, who could do just that. Yoon is working on behalf of the Sawan, Kyoshi said. They've been abetting him in the Fire Nation in return for his service. Heiran frowned. What makes you think that? She wrote on her newly cleaned slate. Everything he's done has strengthened the Sawan's position and weakened Zoryu's. He humiliated the Fire Lord at the party. He created the message in the hillside. How could she not have realized this earlier? Yoon may have been trained as a killer, but his specialty was cutting deals, making sure both parties got what they wanted. The Sawan would shelter him as he worked toward his revenge, and he would tilt the Fire Nation's politics in their favor by sowing chaos. I don't follow you on the crop writing, but if it turned out you were correct then... Heiran ran out of room on the slate and tossed it to the side. She shifted to her bed so she could start writing on the wall. Sheijin and Huazo had been acting dishonorably this whole time. A link between the Sawan and Yoon could turn them from a clan striving for the throne into a conspiracy of traitors. They'd have to submit to justice if they were found out. The other clans respect strength and cunning, but they couldn't possibly forgive inviting a foreign attack on the Fire Nation. Kyoshi looked at Heiran's cropped hair with new admiration for the woman's sacrifice and iron composure under Huazo's insulting touch. If honor was the reason quoted for bloodshed, conflict could be avoided by stripping it away entirely. Right now, it's only a hunch, Kyoshi said. I have to follow up on a few things to confirm it. She turned to leave, but her path was blocked by Rangi, starting back into the room. Rangi glowered viciously at Kyoshi and pushed a steaming hot bowl into her hands. It was filled with plain yellow noodles. You haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon? She screamed. She hurled a pair of chopsticks on the floor and left as abruptly as she returned. Yep, that's Rangi for you. Kyoshi stared at the bowl. There hadn't been any fuel in the kitchen, which meant Rangi must have cooked it with her own firebending. She looked up to see Heiran with an expression that almost crossed the line into smugness. And in love. No more clean feelings. Yep. Yeah, she looked up to see Heiran with an expression that almost crossed the line into smugness. See? Even faster than I thought. You mean everything to her, Kyoshi. She was running her chalk down the nub. My daughter loves you, which means you are also my daughter. For better or worse, you are part of our family. Heiran smiled. Now go on, before your food gets cold. You need your strength. Kyoshi bent her trembling knees and picked up the chopsticks, not caring they'd been on the floor. The noodles were unflavored, boiled from dry and so overly alkaline they still smelled of lye. They were the best thing she ever tasted. Tears ran down Kyoshi's face as she ate her meal. Heiran watching to make sure she finished. And that is the end of that chapter. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna read the next chapter, and that is it. Okay, so, I was gonna say episode. The next chapter is called Escalation. Escalation. Bring us down, Kyoshi said. It was just her and Jinpa right now. Where? He said. By the Hailfire or Lord Chasian? Anywhere. Yin Yang swooped lower on the diseased Melanium crop and landed by the left arm of the character for fire. The writing was detailed enough that once they dismounted, they could walk between the gaps of the strokes. Yin Yang immediately set to rooting through the ground with his nose. Boy! Jinpa scolded. Don't! Those aren't yours! Most people would have assumed the bison would go after the sweet tubers of the healthy plants, but the bison spent his time lapping at the soil itself, aiming his giant tongue under the withering, yellowing melaniums. Hey! Jinpa tugged on his fur. You'll make yourself sick. Yin Yang's behavior added to Kyoshi's suspicion. Yeah, Yin Yang's behavior added to Kyoshi's suspicion. She found a patch of earth he hadn't licked yet and crouched down. Above her head was a sickly plant. He made a face, knowing she was about to live up to an insult that foreigners sometimes hurled at Earth Kingdom natives. She picked up a clod of soil and popped it into her mouth. Kyoshi, are you eating dirt? Jinpa said. She wasn't eating it. Was merely tasting it. A crude but effective technique poor farmers like the ones in Yokuya sometimes used to diagnose their field conditions. Kyoshi turned around to face him and spat her mouth full of grit to the side. It's salty, she said. This field's been poisoned with salt. Kyoshi wiped her tongue on her sleeve and spat again. Yoon bent a message into the soil to kill the plants above. Huazo supplied the materials. She brought out the local salt-making business just recently. That is true. It all added up. Yoon and the Salwon were working together. They had picked their avatar, and Zoryu had his. What do we do now? Jinpa asked. Take us back, Kyoshi said. I want to talk to everyone before I do something rash. I don't think it's enough, Heiran wrote on her slate. Upon Kyoshi's return to the restaurant, the headmistress had joined the rest of the group downstairs. Rangi protested her moving about for fear of worsening her injuries. The screaming and scribbling match reached the screaming and scribbling match reached such proportions that Hayran was forced to order Rangi to leave and cool off with a harshly written young lady. A chair lay scattered. A chair lay. A chair lay. A chair lay shattered in splinters by the door, as her daughter's final resort. It was Kyoshi. It was Kyoshi alone with Junpei and the other folks. I think you're right about you and working with the Sawan, Hayran clarified. But it won't hold up with the rest of the clans. Nyahitha concurred. Your evidence relies on an earth-bending technique no one has ever heard of before now. Then only I have one option left, Kyoshi said. I find the leaders of the Sawan and get a confession from them. A statement from the guilty party was as valid in the Fire Nation as it was in the Earth Kingdom. No one missed the implication. There was a chance Kyoshi was going to have to confront the Sawan with more than just facts. It was good that Rangi wasn't here. She believed the Avatar had a duty to follow the path of righteousness. She had faith. The rest of the group, less so. Kyoshi looked around the table at her new set of companions, gathered by chance instead of choice. They made a motley collection of representatives from every nation. Man. I don't think that's gonna happen. Kyoshi can move violence easy. Yeah, I don't think so. Not yet. They made a motley collection of representatives from every nation. She focused her attention on Junpei. Hayran, Atawa, and Yahitha had been weathered by life and its insults, but the air nomad was still young. His pacifistic beliefs should have prevented him from accompanying Kyoshi where she was headed. She waited for some kind of gentle counter-argument for peace and neutrality from the monk, but it never came. Junpei ran a finger over the restaurant's table, inspecting it for dust. The gesture aged him, made him look like he was an investor considering buying the whole establishment. Just tell me where to take you, Avatar, he said. What a crew they made. A disgraced firebender, a sage without sanctity, a doctor who let people die, and an air nomad involving himself with the dirty politics of the world, with Avatar Kyoshi at the center. None of them were what they were supposed to be. The Flying Opera Company might have gotten along better with this group than she thought. Kyoshi beckoned everyone to listen close. Here's what's going to happen, she said. The nearest viable port was south of the Fairground Beach, around a bend of the coast. The boardwalk had been optimistically filled with stalls for snack vendors and bauble sellers to ambush arriving tourists before they even got to North Chungling. Reef crabs scuttled freely over the jagged rocks. The birds that would have eaten them had too much refused to gorge on. Kyoshi and Atwat got there at the break of dawn to wait for Huazo on the damp wooden pier. Kyoshi had gotten the idea in her head that an extra waterbender might be helpful backup so near the ocean. But Huazo arrived without her niece and only 2 guards. Yeah, but Huazo arrived without her niece and only 2 guards. Her contingent had been left behind in town. It must have suited her to keep a force in Shuhan to meet the coming Kyoso aggression. Hold on. Yeah, it must have suited her to keep a force in Shuhan to meet the coming Kyoso aggression while she made a discreet exit. Leaving so soon? Leaving so soon? Kyoshi said. A single island-hopping ferry boat drifted nearby the water, ready to launch. The festival of Seto's not over yet. Huazo was surprised to see her, but, as always, managed it well. This town has given me what I need. Kyoshi did not have the patience to bandy in euphemisms anymore. Where is Yoon? Where is Yoon? She snarled. Yoon? Is this the boy the Earth Kingdom thought was the Avatar before you? The one who attacked the royal palace and humiliated Zoryu? Huazo's polite front had turned from annoying to nauseating. Earlier, Kyoshi had gone over her plans with her group in a calm, rational manner. But coming face to face with one of the people keeping her from Yoon was a fresh trial. She was too close to her end goal to remain composed. I know he's been working for you, Kyoshi said. Tell me where he is. Huazo craned her neck forward so Kyoshi could see the perfection of her lined face. I have no idea who this person is. I've never met him. Kyoshi drew circles in the air with her wrists, flowing, summoning motions of energy. The crash of the surf hissed in her ears. Water was calmness and tranquility, but it was the rage of a storm as well. She flung her energies at the ship. The ropes mooring it to the dock snapped like threads. A wave as wide as a river carried the boat out to sea, lifting it higher. Once it reached 100 yards out, the riptide Kyoshi created froze in a snap, leaving the ferry held in the air by talons of ice. Huazo's men jumped back and shouted in astonishment. Lost fins, Atwat muttered upon seeing the Avatar's full strength for the first time. You've got enough raw power to freeze the polar... You've got enough raw power to freeze a polar orca solid. Huazo bade her retainers to stand down as Kyoshi came closer and loomed over her. She stared up in defiance. You have nothing, Avatar. Try to intimidate me all you want. Hurt me even. You'd only be strengthening my clan's position in the coming war. There was nothing you could do to me to get what you want. In her own way, the woman was as fearless as Hiram. I had a feeling you might say that. You're coming with me to Capital Island, alone. Killer. No, that's just gonna create more mess than is already been had. You're coming with me to the Capital Island, alone. The Sahuan matriarch broke out into a smile. Kill him too, I don't give a fuck. Nah, they just need to be... They just need not be petty losers. Yeah, the Sahuan matriarch broke out into a smile, as if she'd been handed a gift. That's right, she said to her guards before they leaped on Kyoshi with firebending. The Avatar is taking me hostage on behalf of Zoryu. I'm about to be falsely imprisoned. Her men looked unsure. Send messages to the rest of the clan and our allies, Kawazu said. Tell them what happened here. Don't start anything with the Kaoso until I'm freed from the injustice of Zoryu and his hired bandit, the Avatar. She gave Kyoshi a wink that said, this is how you craft the image of events as they happen, girl. Kawazu took Kyoshi by the elbow and led her... Kawazu took Kyoshi by the elbow and led her ostensible captor off the dock. The two of them could have been a lady and her maid out for a morning stroll. Do you play Paisho, my dear? She asked. Kyoshi tensed so hard, Kawazu could feel it in her biceps. I take that as a no, Kawazu said. I thought as much. You see, my dear, one of the first lessons a player learns is never to interrupt her opponent when she is in the middle of making a fatal mistake. By the time the three of them returned to the coral urchin, Jinpa had retrieved Yin Yang and was perched on top of the bison's neck, finishing preparations for their flight. The great beast filled most of the alley next to the building. Heiran waited by the door. She removed some of the bandages from her neck, but was still clearly feeling the effects of her wound. Upon seeing her, Kawazu burst out laughing. Oh, this keeps getting more hilarious by the second. Oh, she's a bitch. Never mind, Kyoshi, fucking kill her. Fucking kill her. Her grin turned cold and wicked. Oh yeah, no, fucking Jesus. Her grin turned cold and wicked. You know what this means, Heiran. The Avatar has disgraced herself, and you've thrown your lot in with her. When my clan finally triumphs, there will be no mercy for the Seinaka. Oh yeah, fuck this bitch and their entire clan. Oh fuck no. No, 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 no. This is not happening. Kyoshi, kill them all. Sink that island. Dude, yeah. Yeah, sink the island. Sink it. Okay. Yeah, when my clan finally triumphs, there will be no mercy for the Seinaka. Heiran spoke, the injury transforming her normally graceful voice into a terrible rattling whisper. We have no need for mercy, only justice. The dreadful sound, coupled with the raw determination in her voice, silenced her Kawazu for once. Kyoshi took the matriarch of the Sahuan clan by the wrist, eliciting a yelp and lifting her into the grasp of Jinpa. He swung her up into the saddle. Kawazu flumped into the corner of a bolt of cloth, her fine robes and layers of petticoats pooling around her. Kyoshi faced Heian one last time. What if she's right? She muttered. There was no way the Avatar's reputation would emerge from this affair unscathed. By doing this, I'm ruining my own honor. Only because you understand the true meaning and value of the word, Heian rasped. Honor cannot be coveted too, dear. Yeah, honor cannot be coveted too, dear young lady. Not dear, dearly. Honor cannot be coveted too dearly, young lady. Sometimes it must be laid down for the good of others. As if to quell Kyoshi's doubts, Rangi walked around the corner, holding baskets of supplies. The plan had been to keep her away while the Avatar took off with Wazo, but she'd come back too soon, perhaps unable to find what she needed in markets of the declining town. She dropped her burden as soon as she saw their hostage, rolls of gauze and bundles of medicinal herbs scattering at her feet. What's going on here? Rangi shouted as she went up to Kyoshi. Have you lost your mind? Kyoshi took one of her fans out. As gently as she could, she earthbent Rangi into the ground, halfway up to her shins. What in the name of Kyoshi? Is this you? Rangi clawed at the ground around her legs, trying to uproot herself. Stop it! Let me out! There are places my daughter will never go, Heian had once said. There are places Kyoshi would never take Rangi. Just, honorable, kind Rangi who believed in what the Avatar stood for. Kyoshi leaned over and kissed Rangi on the top of her head. Please forgive me, she whispered, before climbing into Yin-Yang's saddle. Kyoshi! Rangi screamed, trapped where she stood. Jinpa snapped the reins. Jinpa snapped the reins, and Yin-Yang rose into the air. Kyoshi! Kyoshi clenched her teeth and wished the bison would climb faster. She needed to be high in the sky where the air was thin, and she could no longer hear Rangi crying her name. And that is the end of that chapter. Oh, God. Oh, God. Thank you so much for listening to all that. I got a lot of reading done. I will see you next time.